but Torah I can read without having to practice. Haftorah is a trope that I don't do as much, so I have to practice that one a little more. So together we make an entire service, Alan.
There you go.
We just have to stick together, and then we'll be able to do an entire service together.
My pleasure.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll begin in just one moment. Alan will be leading us in Mincha. If you're in the Lev Shalom, it's on page 214. If you're in the Sim Shalom, it's on page 226. And if you're in the Shabbat, the Slim Shalom, it's on page 558. Nope, that's not true. If you're in the full volume Sim Shalom, it's on page 558. If you're in the Slim Shalom, it's on page 226. For those of you who use those Sidurim probably knew that before I even corrected myself. All right, Alan, whenever you are ready, I have 7 o'clock, so we can get this party started.
Okay. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yalucha selah. Hashem shekachalo, ashrei Adonai. Pam shadonai Eloha, tila l'dagid. Tilad na'yeder beki, v'varecho b'soshen kochel elam va'ed, v'anachnu v'ech yaham, et av yad olam, hallelujah, u'v'alitzion goel. Ve'ata kadosh yoshefi lo Yisrael, v'kara zeh zeh ve'amar. Kadosh, 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 anat tzvot melachot tzvoto. Vatisa eni ruach v'shmachar korash gadol, baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Titenem leYaakov chesed l'Avraham. V'yivdechu b'cha yodei shemecha, ki lo azatu b'shech Adonai. Adonai chavetz l'man tzidko, yagdil Torah v'yadir.
So we will now enter the Torah service, and I will be reading Torah for us. Give me just 1 second to switch books here. Okay. We are going to be in Parshat Nitzavim, which I will tell you a little bit more about later, but I will tell you that this year, for some bizarre reason, I read through Nitzavim and decided this is my favorite parsha. I really, really loved reading through it, and it has many, many really rich pieces to it that I don't think that I've necessarily paid attention to in the same kind of ways, which is the beauty of Torah, that each year it hits you a little bit differently, and for some reason this year this parsha really hit me in a way that I was very excited to be reading the depths of this parsha. So if you're in a Eitz Chaim Chumash, we're on page 1165. If you are in any old Chumash or Bible, it is Deuteronomy chapter 26, I assume. Nope, chapter 29. Excuse me, chapter 29, 26 was this morning, verse 9. And I'm going to stop in between aliyot, but we are going to go between verse 9 and verse 28, all in chapter 29 of Deuteronomy. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. אתם ניצבים היום כולכם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם, ראשיכם, שבטיכם, זקניכם ושוטריכם, כל איש ישראל, טפכם, נשיכם וגרך אשר בקרב מחנך, מחוטב עצך עד שואב ממך, לעברך בברית אדוני אלוהיך ובעלתו אשר אדוני אלוהיך כורת עמך היום. למען הקים אותך היום לעולם, והוא יהיה לך לאלוהים, כאשר דיבר לך, וכאשר נשבע לאבותיך, לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב, ולא איתכם לבדכם, אנוכי כורת את הברית הזאת, ואת העלה הזאת, כי את אשר ישנו פה עמנו עומד היום לפני אדוני אלוהינו, ואת אשר איננו פה עמנו היום. כי אתם ידעתם את אשר ישבנו בארץ מצרים, ואת אשר עברנו בקרב הגויים אשר עברתם, ותראו את שיקוציהם ואת גלוליהם, עץ ואבן, כסף וזהב אשר עמהם, פן יש בכם איש או אישה או משפחה או שבט, אשר לבבו פונה היום מעם אדוני אלוהינו, ללכת לעבוד את אלוהי הגויים ההם, פן יש בכם שורש פורה ראש ולענה, והיה בשמעו את דברי הלעזות, והתברך בלבבו לאמור שלום יהיה לי, כי בשרירות ליבי אלך למען שפות הרבה את הצמאה. לא יובע אדוני סלוח לו, כי אז ישן אף אדוני וקנאתו באיש ההוא, ורבצה בו העלה הכתובה בספר הזה, ומחה אדוני את שמו מתחת השמיים. That's a really interesting phrase. You should read it in the English. והבדילו אדוני לרעה מכל שבטי ישראל, ככל עלות הברית הכתובה בספר התורה הזה, ואמר הדור האחרון בניכם אשר יקומו מאחריכם, והנוכרי אשר יבוא מארץ רחוקה, וראו את מכות הארץ ההיא ואת תחלואיה, אשר חילה אדוני בה, גופרית ומלח, שרפה כל ארצה, לא תזרע ולא תצמיח, ולא יעלה בה כל עשב, כמהפכת סדום ועמורה, אדמה צבועים, אשר הפך אדוני באפו וחמתו. ואמרו כל הגויים, מה עשה אדוני ככה לארץ הזאת, מחרי האף הגדול הזה, ואמרו על אשר עזבו את ברית אדוני אלוהי אבותם, אשר כרת עמם בהוציאו אותם מארץ מצרים, וילכו ויעבדו אלוהים אחרים וישתחוו להם, אלוהים אשר לא ידעום ולא חלק להם. ויחרף אדוני בארץ ההיא, להביא עליה כל הקללה הכתובה בספר הזה, ויתשם אדוני מאדמתה באף ובחמה ובקצף גדול וישליכם אל ארץ אחרת כיום הזה הנסתרות לאדוני אלוהינו והנגלות לנו ולבנינו עד עולם לעשות כל דברי התורה הזאת. I don't know if you have this in your version of Bible, Chumash, whatever you're looking at, but the words lanu and the words ulvanenu each have over each letter a revia, right? A revi. Revi. Did I just say that wrong? Anyway, have over it the diamond-shaped trope that you would sing, and some people might sing it with that trope, but if you're noticing under Lanu, it actually has its own trope. It has a mapach. So I sang it with a mapach, even though there was a revi'i over it, and each single letter in ulvanenu has a revi'i over each single letter. Many of you will remember that Rabbi Ari Lucas used to talk a lot about how in the Torah there are different moments of big letters and little letters. This is not one of those moments with a big letter or a little letter. We had that a little bit earlier in the Aliyah, but it is a moment where the trope is trying to show us something very important about the significance of the word. And the words in Hebrew of this line are concealed acts concern our Lord, our God, our God. But with over acts, it is for us. That is the first word that has these revi'is over each letter. It is for us and for our children, making it that much more emphasized that it is really for each and every one of us and each and every one of our children. So just wanted to point that out before we move on with our service into the whispered Amidah, which is on page 223 or page 234 or page 574. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. Alan will again lead us as we finish Mincha with Aleinu with Sitkatcha on the top of page 230, which should be around page 247 and around page 596. I don't know if it's exactly on those pages in the Sim Shalom, but it should be either the page before or on those pages. Again, page 230, page 247, or page 596. And Alan probably needs to be unmuted. There you go.
Okay. Tzidkatecha tzedek le'olam v'toratcha emet v'tzidkatecha Elohim ad marom asher asita gedolot Elohim yichamocha tzidkatecha b'karel mishpatecha tehom rabah Adam v'vema toshia Adonai.
Be able to do so, please rise for Aleinu on the following page.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon ha'kol. V'nemar v'Adonai lemelech ha'aretz v'yom ha'u yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have a yard site today, correct?
I do not.
Okay. Ronen, would you like to lead us in Mourner's Kaddish?
Unmute time. Yes.
You're good.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Loamei Almaya.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yasher Koach, Alan, thank you for leading. I always love being told that someone wants to lead because I'm teaching a piece of their favorite Torah. It's always a lovely thing to hear. So, to get into that favorite piece of Alan's Torah, I hope I do it justice. You don't usually get to hear that it's someone's favorite piece of Torah. For those of you who got it off of the Shabbat bulletin, you'll have the text sheet in front of you. Those of you who did not, we are going to be looking in this week's Parsha, in Parshat Nitzavim, and the main verse that we're going to be looking at is Deuteronomy 30, verse 12. So I mentioned at the beginning of the Torah service that this is a very rich chapter. There's many things in this, I shouldn't say chapter, in this Parsha, though a lot of it comes in this beginning section here of chapter 29 and chapter 30, that we hear many tropes, not Torah tropes, but recollections of things that have happened before. And one of the most interesting, to me at least, pieces of this is that we are starting to refer to this piece of our canon, our Torah, which is what we call it now, as something that is being written, right? It's almost, the Torah almost in this Parsha becomes sort of like a journal of Moshe's, right? You are writing things down. This is what I was told to write down. So I'm specifically looking at verse 19 right now of chapter 29, where it says, till every sanction recorded in this book comes down upon him. Right? We don't usually refer to the Torah in the Torah, right? We usually talk about the Torah after it's been written, after we've learned from it. But here we start to see, as we get to the end of this 5 books of Moses, that we're starting to refer to this Torah as an actual book, an actual thing for us to be learning from. So one of the ways that that comes to life is here in chapter 30, verse 12. And this is a moment in which God is speaking to Moshe, but really to all of us, in saying, I hope that this is all clear for you, right? It says, then the Lord your God will open up your heart and the heart of your offspring to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, which we know, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha. We also heard it in this past week's parsha, which we read this morning. And then it says that since you will be heeding that the Lord your God and keeping God's commandments and laws are recorded in this book, again referring to the Torah as this book of the teaching, once you return to the Lord your God with all of your heart and your soul. So if you do all these things, then you're going to return to this book and understand it all. Surely this instruction which I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. And then we get to this verse. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. It's okay if you didn't follow exactly which verses I was reading from. But now we are at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 12, which says, Lo vashamayim hi. It is not in heaven. The context that I just gave you makes us all know that the he here is the Torah. The Torah is not in heaven. This book, this code of law is not in heaven. Lo vashamayim hi le'emor, mi i'ale lanu hashamayma, v'yikacheha lanu v'yisham'enu ota v'na'asena. It's not in the heavens, because, as you might say, if it were in the heavens, who of us is going to go up to the heavens and get this thing for us and give it to us and then observe it? Right? If something is in the heavens, then how can you say that it's for us? Because we're not in the heavens. We're here on earth. So how can you say that this is for us if it's in the heavens? So the Torah says, Lo vashamayim hi. It is no longer in the heavens. And the Gemara has a great time with this. But before we get to the Gemara, even Rashi says, if it were in heaven, it would be your duty. It would be you, Alan Broidy's duty, to go up to heaven and to learn it. Well, we know as humans that that's not, you don't get on a plane and go to heaven, right? It's not a destination we can get to. So what Rashi is saying is, if it was in heaven, we would still be after it, right? It would still be our commandment to go after it. So how can it be in heaven? Of course it's not in heaven anymore, because we can't go and get it. Eruvin, a part of the Talmud that we're actually in right now in the Daf Yomi cycle, takes up this idea and brings it one step further. What is the meaning of that which is written, it is not in heaven, nor is it beyond the sea, which is what comes in the next line of Torah. It's in this line of Torah, it says it's not in heaven, and then the next line it says it is not beyond the sea. It is not in heaven, the Gemara says, indicates that if it were in heaven, you would have to ascend after it. That's what Rashi said too. By the way, Rashi very often is quoting the Gemara in his own commentary, so that's why sometimes there's parallels there. And if it were beyond the sea, you would have to cross after it. So the Gemara is adding that there's no possible way that what the Torah meant was that we should go after something that we can't actually access. Okay, my guess is that this next part is what Alan was referring to as his favorite piece of Torah. This part of the Gemara that we're about to read from Bava Metzia is probably the most well-known piece of Gemara, and it's also one of the major pieces of the Talmud that influences and influenced conservative Judaism. So the way in which we think about halacha, the way in which our movement thinks about our connection, humans' connection to the law and to our religion, much of it is influenced by this passage that we are about to read here. It is informally known as the passage of the Tanur Shel Achnai. In the Talmud, if you're trying to find it, it's not listed under the Tanur Shel Achnai. It's on Bava Metzia. It's on in Tractate Bava Metzia on page 59. But it's known as the Tanur Shel Achnai because that's the main item that the rabbis are discussing in this passage. So I'm going to read through this story for you, and then I'm going to pause, and I would love to hear some reactions about the story and how it answers this question of what does it mean that our Torah is not in heaven any longer. So this is the Gemara on Bava Metzia on page 59. And this is known as the oven of Achnai, the Tanur Shel Achnai. The Gemara asks, what's the relevance of Achnai? Achnai means a snake, so it most likely was a circular oven. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, it is characterized in that manner due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when at rest, and deemed it impure. Okay, so they're actually talking about an oven and how it became impure. And this next part is where it really begins our story. The sages taught, on that day when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations from him. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha, if Jewish law is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree right outside the Beit Midrash will uproot from its place 100 cubits, and some say even 400 cubits. The rabbi said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from the carob tree. We don't make law based on a tree. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the Jewish law is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backward and began flowing in the opposite direction. They said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall of the Beit Midrash will prove it. The walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? The Gemara relates, the walls did not fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten because of the deference due to Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning. So one day, someone's going to find a Beit Midrash that has walls like this and assume that it's from this story. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. The Shamayim will say so. A divine voice emerged, a bat kol said from heaven, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion? He's been right every time, so why are you arguing? What's the point in your argument here? If you're on the sheet that I provided, you can turn it over now. Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, it is written, Lo bashamayim hi. It is not in heaven. The Gemara asks, what's the relevance of this phrase, Lo bashamayim hi, in this context, in this story of the walls and the carob tree and the stream? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halacha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. That's the sentence I just read is a commentary by Rav Steinsaltz. but it gives you the context for what they're saying. Back in the text, the Gemara says, years later, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that time when Rabbi Yehoshua issued his declaration? Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, Nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. My children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. So other than just having the sentence, Lo bashamayim he, in this story, why is this story important or connected even to this idea of the law or even the Torah itself no longer living in the heavens, but being amongst the people where we can now say, where God can now say, Nitzchuni banai, my children have triumphed over me. Feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute. Yeah, Alan. You have to yeah.
I have much to say about this.
Okay, well, we have 19 minutes till Havdalah, so you decide how much you want to say.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, part of it is because I learned this, I studied this with Rabbi David Hartman, Zichrono Livracha, in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before the Hartman Institute.
Yeah.
When he had a class on philosophical implications of rabbinic thought. And Perry Netter, then Perry Netter, not Rabbi Perry Netter, was in that class with me. And this class and this particular portion of the Gemara had a profound impact on my life and had me connected to Jewish law. And I almost became a rabbi after all of this.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yes, it was close, but but on one level, the what's going on here is that the Talmud is teaching us that we're not listening to divine revelation anymore. There's not going to be any new revelation. It's like with the prophets or anything else, you can't change the law. This is the law. This is what we've got. We're not relying on divine, on a bat kol to be able to change that law, to change the law. And so there was going to be in the hands of the rabbis to be able to determine the law after the majority, after there was going to be the vote. But the thing that impressed me the most, and that stayed with me from my learning with Rabbi Hartman, is that he said, Al tikra nitzchuni banai. Don't read it as my children have defeated me. Ella natzchuni banai, from Netzach. My children have eternalized me. My children have eternalized me.
I love that.
Because when the Torah is in the hands of the rabbis to be able to determine what it means and to be able to deal with future tasks that are going on with it, then the Torah can truly be eternal. And it's something, you can ask Josh, Rabbi Wachowski. He knows I love talking about this. He chides me about it that when I do it. But it speaks to me and resonates with me so profoundly. It's just true. They have this eternalizes Torah for the Jewish people because you can interpret it. It's not a dead document. It's something that's living, it's ongoing. I think Rabbi Hartman wouldn't like this, but I think he was a wonderful conservative Jew, a wonderful conservative rabbi.
First of all, I love word plays, and so I love that he did that because the Gemara is not vocalized, right? There's no vowels in the Gemara, so the way that he read it is possibly the actual way to read it. It's possible that we've all been reading Nitzchuni because someone saw it vocalized that way, and yet the way that Rabbi Hartman read it could be true. And I actually love that. I love that interpretation because it's almost saying the same thing, and yet it says it in a much more powerful way. That the way that Nitzchuni is read is that my children have taken over. They know it all. They now know how to keep the tradition alive in their own way. But what you're saying, and what you're quoting Rabbi Hartman in saying, is that there's a part of needing to actually live it and breathe it and feel it. That it's not just that you've learned it, but that it's something that you've really internalized in such a way that it is yours, that it has become yours, not just something that you've learned. And I love that. I love that. This is one of also my favorite pieces of Gemara, so I share that with you. But thank you for that teaching. That's really.
By the way, it's very interesting that all this is so important, because really Bava Metzia is not really dealing with this section. It deals with Hona'ah, which is a whole section on fraud, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, in Bava Metzia, and then I'll get to you, Larry, Bava Metzia also talks about loss, right? And how it's the idea of losing something and how you retrieve it. And in a way, though they don't make this connection to this story, there is something here about loss, right? That God had to be willing to give it up to be able to have us retrieve it, which I think in some way, I mean, it's not what Bava Metzia is about, you are correct, but in some way I do think it's theologically related.
I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, Larry.
It's wonderful to listen to the two of you, and I can only suggest that both of you, or Alan, should give a shiur next Shavuot at Leil Tikkun Shavuot on this teaching.
Right.
I didn't have the honor of studying with Rabbi Hartman, but at least I'm Alan's friend, so I take some. I'll take it right where I can get it. I actually think, though, I disagree slightly with Alan's interpretation. The Torah is not in the hands of the rabbis. The Torah is in our hands, because this lesson is talking to all the Jewish people. The Torah is put in our hands, and as I often do in Rabbi Klickfeld's class, I disagree with Rashi entirely here in interpretation.
That's a hard class to disagree with Rashi, given that it's a Chumash with Rashi class.
It's an easy class to do it. But anyways, no, the point is not if the Torah were in heaven, we would have to get it. The point is, the text is telling us this is not an impossible thing to do. This is not something that only heroes can do. This is not something that only gods or demagogues can do at all. This is something that you can do, and you can do here on earth, and you must do this here on earth. And that's also clearly the lesson of the Agadah in the Talmud. It's telling us, no, don't wait around for miracles to interpret what it is, who is right and who is wrong. You wrestle with those ideas themselves. And one last point, which is not a political point, but a legal point, and I'm not a lawyer, Alan is, but this would argue against the doctrine of original intent, that basically the Constitution or the law, halakha, this is a defense of conservative Judaism, the halakha must move, and we have an obligation to relate the halakha to not only our place here on earth, but to our time here on earth. I wish we had more time in these.
I know. I actually added time. I don't know if any of you picked up on this, but usually we don't have as much time as we did today, and we'll still go over. But I tried to add an extra 5 minutes for this teaching. You're exactly right, and it's actually how I ended my source sheet here. Joanna, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. It's actually how I ended my source sheet, because I 100% agree with you, and it's interesting. I didn't hear it as a dissonance to what Alan was saying. But you're right that it's not just people who are supposedly the ones to know Torah or to be taught more Torah than others. It's to everyone. Every single person is supposed to be learning this and knowing this and taking this to heart and completely infusing themselves with it. And the verse in Deuteronomy right after this verse that we read is Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom Le'ahava Et Adonai Elohecha Latet Bedarcha Velishmor Mitzvotav Vechukotav Umishpotav Vehayita Veravita Uverechecha Hashem Elohecha Be'eretz Asher Atava Shama Larishta. So I command you, I God, command you this day to love Adonai your God, to walk in God's ways, to keep God's commandments and laws, and to live and to be great, to thrive, and to be blessed by God, by Adonai, our God, in this land that you're about to possess and enter. However, that I wanted to like rework the Torah so that we could have these verses that I'm about to read after as opposed to before. Because though they are before and therefore people will have read them first and hopefully embody them and take them on through this teaching, I actually think the next verses that I'm about to read, which are the beginning of our parsha, should go after this teaching so that everyone knows exactly what Larry just pointed out from this idea of lo bashamayim hi. Atem nitzavim hayom. These are the first three words of our parsha. We stand today against you. Natzav is to be opposite or against. We stand across from you, all of you, before Adonai our God. Tribal heads, elders, your officials, all the people of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from a wood chopper to a water drawer, to enter into the covenant of Adonai your God, which Adonai your God is concluding with you this day, with its, it says here in the English, sanctions. It's really like a covenant. That if you break it, that's why it says sanctions, that you wouldn't want to break it. It's a different kind of covenant. To the end that God may establish you this day as God's people and be your God, as God promised you and as God swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before Adonai our God, and with those who are not with us here this day. And I always bring tears to my eyes to read that, because I think that it's, first of all, it is not something that we think of when we're reading the weekly parsha. I'll speak for myself. It is not something I think of when I'm reading through the weekly parsha, that this was written for Rebecca Schatz. I often think, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I teach from this often? But I don't ever think these words were written for me. But the Torah is saying right here in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th line of this week's parsha, that it's not just for the people who were physically there to hear this, but it's for everyone who was once part of this people and who will be part of this people. That it's for each and every one of us. So how can it be in the heavens? Yeah, Alan.
Yes, what you're saying is the Midrash is we were all standing at Sinai.
Right.
It was all generations. Not for this very point that yes, we all receive Torah.
Right.
And we all go about it. But the question about the Natzchuni and Nitzchuni deals with religious legal system and how the law is determined after the majority.
Right.
Yes, all of us are expected to accept Torah, but the interpretation of that Torah depends on what the majority are going to do. In the conservative movement, it's the RA that determines the Jewish law and standards, that determines what's going to be a validated option and what is not. And it's after the majority one inclines. And so even though we all receive Torah, we all heard it in our own way, in terms of what the observance of the law is and what we're permitted to do is going to be determined by the majority of the rabbis to make that determination.
Great. Paula, you have something to say, and then I'm going to wrap us up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to take issue with what Alan said, because those rabbis get it wrong and it changes over time. And women were not ordained before. And now look what we have. We have Rebecca Schatz today. We did not have same-sex marriages before. Look at what we have today. We have same-sex marriages. So I'm with Larry, where I think we get to have our own midrash. I think we get to have our own interpretation because we were standing there, and sometimes we're ahead of our times, and those other folks have to catch up with us.
I think that there's some, thank you, Paula, and I appreciate being able to now be here. There's something extremely powerful about hearing this right before the Torah ends and right before we begin the Torah again. Because for those of us who have been through that cycle many times, we know that the end of the Torah is full of laws, full of a different kind of people, because we are now a people. At the beginning of the Torah, we're scattered. We haven't yet figured out, we're not even Jews yet, right? We have to figure out who we are. But by the end of the Torah, we're a people. We've entered a land. We are together. We have community. And yet when we begin the Torah, it's a very different kind of God. It's a very different kind of people. It's a very different kind of story. And one that feels further away from us than the story that we're telling in this week's parasha, which can feel very connected to the lives that we live now. And I think that there's power in hearing these words right before we begin the Torah again, that everything about this Torah was written for each one of us to be able to understand how to, yes, create law, and yes, be a Jew, and yes, have different kinds of observances in accordance to that law. But that it's for each one of us to understand what that is. It's not in heaven. It's not sitting up somewhere but behind glass for us to have to follow along and read exactly what it says and do exactly what it says. It's for each one of us to understand how in our lives we need to be taking on the halacha, or we need to be taking on the minhag, the custom, or we need to be taking on the different pieces of Torah. So I hope that as we wrap up this year of Torah, and as we move into this next year of Torah, that you think about how, and not in a selfish way, because I believe that there are many pieces of Torah that are actually teaching us to look beyond ourselves and to look outwards into community. But the idea of lo bashamayim hi is that it's for each and every one of us. And it's for each and every one of us to put into ourselves, to understand, and to then do something with it. So I hope that you have the clarity and the time to be able to figure out how for you, the Torah that you hear and the Torah that you learn is really seeping into you as a person, and that you are accepting it as part of yourself as opposed to something that is too hard to reach or too high above you to possibly be able to fathom having it as part of your life. We'll continue now with Mariv, which is on page 264 or page 281 or page 200. I know that Havdalah is in 2 minutes. We'll get there in like 6. But we will do a meaningful and a kavanah-filled Mariv nonetheless. So page 264, page 281, page 200, I will lead us in Mariv. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיבה פה ולא ירקו חמתו, אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ברוך אתה אדוני אלינו וכל מה ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב ערבים, אהבת עולם בית ישראל וחתר מצוות אפילו משתים את העולם. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אל מלך נאמן. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת, ואמונה כל זו קיים עלינו גאוננו. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה בני ישראל לכנו שירה ושמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורתי לוט עושה פלא מלכותך ראו בניך בוקר הים לפני משה זה אלי אנו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום ומדינו ושמור צאתנו ואוהנו לחיים ושלום יתהווה עד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד. We will now go into the whispered Amidah for Mariv, page 270, page 286, or page 210. Please do not forget to do the insertion for the end of Shabbat. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We're going to turn now to Aleinu on page 281, page 297, or page 696. עלינו לשבח לאדון כל עתיד לגלה יצר בשש שלו. ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך לכל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We'll turn now to Psalm 27, which is on page 113, I believe. Sorry, my flipping skills are not going as fast as I would like them to.
It's page 40 in the big book.
Oh, thank you, Alan. לדוד אדוני יריבי שמי מירא אדוני יסחיה מימי אבחד בקרב על המרי מלכו. אחת שאלתי מת אדוני אתה בקשבתי בבית אדוני כל ימי חיי לך חסף ונועם אדוני לבק ומלכו וצאני מסקה וימר וסתוני מסתוני. ותסתפנך ממני אל תברך ולא תקרב ותקרב. לו להאמנתי לרב בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים קבל אדוני חזק ויאמץ ליבך וקבל אל אדוני. Marlise and Gary, would you like to unmute and lead us in Kaddish?
We need light.
Okay.
Are we unmuted?
Are unmuted.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabah.
Amen.
Yamad divra kirute v'amlich malchute. V'chayachon v'yomachon v'chei deho beit Yisrael. V'agalah b'zman kariv v'yamru amen.
Amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach leolam lamei amaya.
Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam u'amei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitfa'ar v'umam yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithalei v'halal shmei d'kudsha b'rechu. Leila min kol berkata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Damiram be'alma v'yamru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom v'mama. Hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
Amen. All right, let's do a little Havdalah, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry that it is a few minutes late, but I'm glad that we had the time to study together. Yanai nanai nai nai yanai nanai nai yanai yanai nanai nai nai yanai nanai nai 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 yaina nai 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 yaina nai 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 yaina nai 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 yaina nai nai yana nai nai hine el yeshuati eftach velo echad ki ozi vezimrat yad Adonai vayahili lishua Ushaftemayim besason mimaynei Yeshua l'Adonai Yeshua alamcha virchatecha sela Adonai tzevaot imanu miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov sela Adonai tzevaot Ashrei Adam boteach bach Adonai Yoshia Hamelech yaneinu v'yom koreinu LaYehudim Hayta ora V'simcha v'sason V'yikar כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועתך, ובשם אדוני אקרא, יין עיני, יין עיני, עיני, יין עיני, יין עיני, עיני, עיני. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני ושמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מאורי האש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול, זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול וככוכבים בלילה. זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול וככוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי, במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו, עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד. Shavua Tov, everyone. So nice to be with you for the end of Shabbat. And hope to see you throughout this week at some point, whether learning or in a class. I would love to be able to see you. And I just want a show of hands. I know not everybody has their camera on. I would just love a show of hands. And those of you on YouTube can share this with me later, or you can email me. How many of you would add another like 15-ish minutes to this so that we could have a little bit more learning and do Havdalah on time? Would that work for people? Great. Okay. I will make that case for after the Chagim. All right, everyone. Shavua Tov. Really, really nice to see you, and I hope you have a wonderful week.